How do you see all of this playing out in the 2018 elections from what you're seeing both nationally, but more specifically in some of the high-profile races that we're looking at in places like Georgia and Florida?
And what I see happening is civil society, and in fact, many citizens are now on alert. I take, for instance, the example of Randolph County, Georgia. What happened there was, let me back up. What happened there was that a consultant who was an ally of Brian Kemp, who is our Secretary of State and now the Republican running for governor, had recommended in Randolph County that is over 60% black.
This is in Georgia. For our listeners, we're talking about Georgia here.
Georgia, yes,
right.
Randolph County in Georgia had recommended that 60% of Randolph County is African American. He had recommended that 7 of the 9 polling places be shut down before the general election. Now, he used the excuse that they were not ADA compliant. But the issue of ADA compliance was not there during the primary when Brian Kemp was running, nor was it there during the GOP runoff between Brian Kemp and Casey Cagle. It reared its head when it became clear that Kemp was going to be running against Stacey Abrams, an African-American woman. And when you began to look at where his consultant had designated most of the polls to be closed, there were 10 counties in Georgia. Those 10 counties all had sizable black populations. But civil society was watching and began spreading the word about what these recommendations were designed to do. And how they were designed to force many Randolph County residents to go 10 miles to be able to vote. And they flooded social media, they flooded traditional media, and they packed the Board of Elections meeting where that proposal was being voted upon, and they shut it down. And so it's that kind of, frankly, eternal vigilance. This election is requiring that level of eternal vigilance. We see in Texas, where Texas also has a strict voter ID law. Texas tried to close over 200 departments of motor vehicles where people could get their licenses. So with Texas trying to close over 200 of these, and they already had 1/3 of their counties without a Department of Motor Vehicles when they passed SB 14, their voter ID law, that was going to require people to make a 250-mile round trip to get a license, but you don't drive. This was massive voter suppression again, because it wasn't like they were offering a viable alternative. And remember, there is a close election happening in Texas right now that looks like it can unseat sitting Senator Ted Cruz. And so you're seeing all of these methods being deployed because the Republicans are almost like their population is about 90% white, and their platform cannot speak to a broader, diverse America. It could, but they've made a choice for it not to, and to speak, in fact, to the base. And by speaking to the base, they have then become very repugnant to many Americans. There was a recent poll where millennials, African American, Latino, and Asian American millennials, and white millennials all said that the Republican Party just did not address any of their concerns. So the response then is, how do you win these elections if our policies don't bring in the voters? And the way they're doing it is via voter suppression.
Do you see this trend continuing?
I see that they will fight tooth and nail for voter suppression. And I say that because it would seem, for instance, that after a federal court says, this has a discriminatory impact, that the state would go back going, oops, sorry, didn't mean that, and then draft a law that was clean. But that's not what Texas did. That's not what North Carolina did. That's not what Wisconsin did. Instead, they went back and tried to finesse it so that they could push it through again to have the same disparate impact on minority voters. And so, and having to go back to the court over and over and over and over. And so now, for instance, we're looking at North Carolina, that the court has said your gerrymandered districts are racially discriminatory. And North Carolina's response is, yeah, but it's too close to the election to redraw them, so why don't we just keep them? And that is part of the way that this thing works. And so you imagine holding yet another election with racially discriminatory boundaries to create a racially discriminatory state legislature. So it's going to require our eternal vigilance. It's going to require that we vote. I mean, we have got to turn out and vote. Again, I look at those folks in Alabama, where Alabama did everything possible to keep them from the polls. And they turned out in record numbers higher than the state average. That's what we're going to have to do if we're going to be able to then put in place policymakers who really value and believe in democracy and are trying to figure out how do we include more American citizens in this democracy than rather exclude them.